In the winter of feudal Japan, when the mountains were buried under silence and the roads between villages became indistinguishable from the frozen earth around them, there existed a particular kind of test that no sword could prepare a man for. It was not the test of combat. It was not the test of strategy or speed or technical precision. It was something quieter and far more devastating. It was the test of what a man does when the external world offers him nothing. No enemy to focus his attention. No crisis to sharpen his resolve. No audience to perform his strength for. Just the cold and the silence and the question that both of them ask without words. Who are you when there is no reason to be anyone? Most men failed this test without ever knowing they were taking it. There was a soldier in the service of a provincial lord who had survived 3 battles before the age of 30. He wore his survival like armor. In the village where he was stationed during the long winter months, men spoke of him with a particular kind of reverence that is reserved for those who have stood where others have fallen. He accepted this reverence quietly, which made it seem like humility. It was not humility. It was something closer to its opposite. He had survived those battles through a combination of training, circumstance, and the chaos that war produces. That randomness that sometimes protects the reckless as readily as it destroys the prepared. But in his mind, survival had become evidence of something deeper. He had begun to believe, without ever saying it plainly, that he was different from other men. That he possessed some interior quality, some bedrock of hardness that would hold regardless of what life placed upon it. This belief required no maintenance. That was the seduction of it. He did not need to train in the cold because he had already proven himself in battle. He did not need to sit with discomfort in stillness because he had already faced death in motion. The past had written a story about him, and he had decided to live inside that story rather than continue writing it. Winter deepened. The battles remained in the past. And slowly, invisibly, the thing he believed was permanent in him began to soften. Not dramatically. The mind does not collapse the way a wall collapses. It erodes, slowly, in small concessions that each feel, in the moment, like reasonable adjustments. He began sleeping later because the cold made early rising unnecessarily punishing. He stopped his sword drills because there was no immediate need for them. He ate heavily and sat long beside the fire because warmth, he told himself, was what the body needed to recover from the campaigns behind him. He was not becoming weak. He was resting. He was restoring. He was being wise with his energy. This is what the erosion of mental hardness always sounds like from the inside. It sounds like wisdom. It sounds like self-awareness. It sounds like a man who has learned from experience that he does not need to prove himself anymore. But hardness is not a possession. It is a practice. And any practice that is abandoned, regardless of how long it was previously maintained, begins immediately to dissolve. The body understands this clearly. Muscle that is not used diminishes. Endurance that is not tested retreats. But the mind understands it far less readily, because the mind can construct, with remarkable sophistication, the illusion that its capacities remain intact even when they are quietly disappearing. By the time spring arrived, and with it the summons to return to service, the soldier discovered something that no external observer would have predicted, and that he himself could not fully explain. He was afraid, not of the enemy, not of the specific danger ahead. He was afraid in a way that had no clear object, a formless anxiety that lived beneath everything, that made the prospect of difficulty feel not like a challenge to be met, but like a threat to be survived. The hardness he had assumed was structural had been circumstantial all along. And the winter, which had asked nothing of him, had taken everything. This is the first truth about becoming hard to kill mentally. The mind does not stay hard on its own. It must be made hard continuously, through deliberate and repeated exposure to resistance. Not the resistance of crisis, which arrives uninvited and forces the issue, but the resistance that is chosen, daily, in the absence of necessity. The cold water when warm water is available, the early hour when sleep is still possible. The difficult thought confronted when avoidance is an option. Voluntary hardness. Chosen suffering. The practice of meeting discomfort before it meets you. The samurai tradition understood this not as punishment, but as preparation. The Japanese concept of shu, the first stage of mastery, demanded absolute repetition of fundamentals without deviation. Not because the fundamentals were exciting, not because repetition felt productive, but because the mind that can perform under pressure is the mind that has performed the same action so many times in comfort that pressure no longer changes the equation. You do not rise to the occasion. You fall to the level of your preparation. And your preparation is built in the ordinary hours that no one is recording. Consider Yamaoka Tesshu, the 19th century Japanese swordsman, calligrapher, and Zen practitioner who is regarded as one of the last great samurai. Tesshu did not pursue hardness as a concept. He pursued it as a daily architecture. He trained with a ferocity that his contemporaries found difficult to witness, engaging in sessions of continuous sparring that lasted hours, absorbing thousands of strikes without retreat, without complaint, without the comfort of knowing when it would end. He did this not when he felt ready, not when conditions were favorable. He did this as a matter of structure, as something that belonged to the day the way breathing belonged to the body. But what made Tesshu remarkable was not the physical endurance. It was what the physical endurance was building underneath. Every session that continued past the point of wanting to stop was a conversation between Tesshu and his own mind. And the message of that conversation, repeated thousands of times across decades, was this: discomfort does not have authority over me. Pain is information, not instruction. The body's desire to stop is a suggestion, not a command. And I am the one who decides whether that suggestion is followed. This is what mental hardness actually is. It is not the absence of pain. It is not the absence of fear. It is the absence of the belief that pain and fear have the right to determine what you do next. The hard man feels everything the soft man feels. He simply does not give those feelings a vote. The soldier by the fire had given his feelings every vote. He had constructed an entire philosophy of rest around the simple fact that discomfort was unpleasant. And in doing so, he had handed the governance of his life to the part of himself least qualified to govern it, the part that wants warmth, that wants ease, that wants the story of past strength to substitute for the practice of present strength. Here is the psychological mechanism at the center of this failure, and it is one worth examining with precision. When a man has experienced genuine hardship and survived it, the mind forms an identity around that survival. He becomes, in his own self-conception, a man who can handle difficulty. And that identity, once formed, creates a subtle but powerful resistance to further testing. Because further testing carries a risk that feels unbearable to the ego. The risk of discovering that the identity was situational, that the hardness was borrowed from circumstance rather than built from practice, that he is not, in fact, the man he believes himself to be. So the mind avoids the test. It frames avoidance as confidence. It says, I do not need to prove myself because I already know what I am capable of. But this is precisely backwards. The man who knows what he is capable of is the man who tests himself continuously, not the man who rests on a previous result. The previous result is history. History does not protect you from the present moment. Mental hardness is not a mountain you climb once and then stand upon forever. It is a road you walk every day. And the day you stop walking it, you begin, imperceptibly, to slide backward. The Spartans understood this in the structure of their entire civilization. From the age of 7, Spartan boys entered the agoge, the state-sponsored training program that was not designed to produce soldiers, but to produce men who could not be broken. The physical training was severe, but the deeper purpose was psychological. Every cold night without adequate shelter, every meal deliberately reduced below satisfaction, every humiliation absorbed without visible reaction, was a controlled experiment in teaching the mind that it could endure more than it believed it could, that the boundary between bearable and unbearable was not fixed, that it could be moved deliberately through practice, and that the man who had moved that boundary further than his enemy had already won something more important than any single battle. They were not building men who felt no discomfort. They were building men who had learned through years of repetition that discomfort was not a signal to stop. It was a signal that the training was working. This is what modern men have largely lost. Not the capacity for hardness. The capacity is always there. It is biological. It is ancient. It waits in every man like a language he was born knowing but was never taught to speak. What has been lost is the daily practice of choosing difficulty, the cultural permission to suffer voluntarily, the understanding that the comfortable life, pursued exclusively, produces a man who is exquisitely suited for comfort and catastrophically unprepared for anything else. And life will always eventually produce something else. The soldier who softened through the winter was not a bad man. He was not a coward in any simple sense. He was a man who had made the entirely human mistake of believing that what he had built could be stored rather than maintained. That strength was a thing rather than a practice. That the mind, like a sword kept in its scabbard, would remain sharp simply by being left alone. A sword kept in its scabbard does not remain sharp, it rusts. The mind kept from difficulty does not remain hard. It softens, quietly, completely, without announcement. To become hard to kill mentally is therefore not a destination. It is a daily standard. It is the decision, made before feeling is consulted, to choose the harder option when the easier one is available. To sit with silence when distraction is within reach. To move when stillness is more comfortable. To confront the thought that frightens you rather than building another room in your mind, to keep it locked away from view. It means training the mind the way Tesshu trained the body, not for performance, not for the approval of observers, but for the private, cumulative, unspectacular work of becoming someone that difficulty cannot destroy. Hard to kill does not mean invulnerable. Hard to kill means that when life brings its weight, and it will always bring its weight, you have spent enough ordinary days practicing resistance that the weight does not find you hollow. Do not wait for the battle to discover what you are made of. The battle will not give you time to prepare. Prepare now. In the quiet, in the cold, in the absence of urgency. The man who chooses discomfort daily becomes the man who cannot be broken by it when it is no longer a choice. That is the samurai standard, not glory, not drama, not the performance of strength for those who are watching. The standard is this: when everything is taken from you, when comfort is gone and certainty is gone, and the audience has long since left, you continue, not because you feel strong, but because you built something in the private hours that does not require feeling to function. Become that man. Not tomorrow, now, in this moment, in this hour, in the small decision that no one will see and no one will record. Because the man who is hard to kill is never built in the moment of crisis. He is built in every quiet moment before it, when building was a choice, and he chose it anyway.